I used to live in a small house in a small town. I loved my home, mainly due to an almost untouched forest behind my property where I would play with my friends. My story begins as I was playing hide and seek, or something like that, with my friends when I was 7 years old. I was running through the forest alongside a small river, trying to find him, when I heard some faint music. It sounded cheery. I followed the sound up the river and saw a circus in the distance. I continued walking for about 20 or so minutes until I could get a good look at it. The first thing that caught my eye was a bright sign with the words "Circus of Smiles" painted onto it. After observing the bright flashing lights and colors, I realized everything seemed a bit eerie. There were no people. There were a few stands selling treats and toys, but even they stared blankly into the distance. The parking lot had no cars, and the barely noticeable dirt road leading into it had small weeds growing from it, as though it hadn't been used in years. The whole thing kinda creeped me out, so I turned around.
"Where are you going, kiddo?"
A voice called. I was just playing a game with my friend. I didn't mean to come here," I replied shakily, while turning around slowly.
"Why, you're just in time for the show,"
said the voice. "I don't have any money," as I turned around and saw the owner of the voice, a clown that seemed to have a little too much paint on his face, giving him a more creepier look rather than the usual friendly, goofy look most clowns had.
"Don't worry, kiddo. Just for you, it's free."
I don't really have the time." He grabbed me and took me into the tent. I tried screaming for help, but he just kept reassuring me I was going to have fun. He sat me down on one of the stands inside the tent before leaving. I was alone, but not for long. He came back and handed me a donut. It was stale and tasted terrible. I vomited before my first bite. That was terrible.
Shh. The show is about to start.
In came all the performers for the acts. The sight made me feel more sick. Each of them had stitches on their faces, so when they would smile, it was a more stretched out, horrible, and evil smile. They all looked at me with sad expressions in their pleading eyes. Some of them had extra limbs crudely stitched on their bodies. I started crying. "I want to leave. I just want to leave."
No, the show just begun.
It was only now that I noticed the clown had the same saddened eyes as the rest, and underneath the paint I could now see the stitching. A man stepped out, who didn't have the stitches. He had a large grin with unnaturally oversized teeth, and extremely pale eyes with leather skin, almost as if you could peel it off of his face. He stared at me.
"Welcome to the Circus of Smiles. I am Mr. Smiles, and I organized this performance."
The acts of the show were horrible. Clowns came out and wept. Some performers would stab themselves with rusty knives, cut their eyes out, burn themselves, or remove their extra limbs and stitch them on another person. Mr. Smiles would sit there and laugh while the performers mouthed, "Help me." The show ended and I asked the clown if I could leave. He told me that Mr. Smiles wanted to see me, but I didn't want to go. He picked me up. I struggled, but it did not do anything. He put me down outside of a small tent with a sign that said, Mr. Smiles. I want to leave, I cried.
I'm so sorry.
He shoved me into the tent where Mr. Smiles waited patiently. I gulped nervously as I looked around the tent. Rusty old surgical equipment was scattered along the blood-stained beds. Mr. Smiles stared at me with a needle and some thread. He stared at me for a while, smiling, before opening his mouth.
I hope you enjoyed our performance.
I want to leave. I just want to leave.
But little boy, I was hoping you would want a job here. I'm sure you'd be an entertaining performer. I just need to fix you so you always have a nice smile.
No! I screamed.
Oh, I'm sure you would like it.
He grabbed me and put me on one of the beds. In a shift action, I grabbed one of the instruments and stabbed him in the stomach before running out of the tent. All the performers were there, watching me as I ran. Mr. Smiles burst out of the tent and was catching up to me. I dove into the river, and my exhausted body was pulled under effortlessly. I struggled, but eventually blacked out. I was swept up the side of the river near the town, where I woke up after receiving CPR from a man. My parents were called and were happy when I was found. They asked me what happened, and I told them I didn't know. Since then, I tried living normally, and to a degree I have been successful. But I still remember the Circus of Smiles clearly. And that was 10 years ago today.